before we started recording, we were talking about chess briefly, and I want to dig into that a little bit because chess is one of the oldest games.
Hmm.
There are antecedents to chess. There are examples of games that go even further back, but chess is something that's been ingrained in the popular imagination well before the modern world, well before digital technology, and yet it's seeing a bit of a resurgence with people playing online. And I find it a fascinating way into games because it's complex in some ways, but it's also very simple in some ways. I mean, chess was, they devised a computer that could beat humans at chess decades ago, whereas a computer that could beat humans at Go, for example, a
Hmm.
Chinese board game, was only a few years ago that finally came to fruition. Um, Chess, the complexity of chess comes in a way that games aren't made today. Games are made in a different kind of complexity, a visual, audio complexity, a UI complexity. Um, but you're a gamer. Why play chess when you have all of these other fascinating options, like and colorful options? What is it about chess?
What is it about chess? Um, I didn't play chess, so this is what we were talking about before. I didn't play chess for a long time. I would get analysis paralysis about it, and that made it very difficult to kind of really dig deep into it because I think one of the things about chess is that it's very, very tied to how we perceive somebody's intelligence. Unlike other video games, chess and Go as well are two games that really we associate that if you're good at that game, you must be really smart. So I think that already pushes some people away from chess, but is also the reason that some people might choose it over other video games. There's this kind of idea that, I don't completely agree with, though I do feel it at times as well, that maybe time playing chess isn't as wasted as time playing a video game. So I could see some people choosing chess because they feel like it's a more worthwhile endeavor and will actually provide them some other benefits. Now, I don't fully agree with that. And I think it's also one of the reasons that some people get, you know, taken away from chess and aren't as into it because they think, oh, it's just for those intellectual smarty book types, and I'll never be good at chess. No, it's a game. It's a game like many other games. And one of the really nice things about it is that it's a two-player game. And there just aren't that many two-player games, whether video or board, that have that engaging and replayability, right? It's a game where you're playing the other person, and there are video games like that. There's lots of games like, let's say, Starcraft, huge game with esports abilities where you are playing someone else. And it's interesting because every time you play, it's the two of you against each other, but it's going to be different every time because the choices that people make, right? You can't necessarily predict them perfectly. Unlike playing a game that is scripted and you know what could happen, and maybe you've played it before, so you know exactly what's going to happen. It's about skill against another person. And so that always keeps it interesting. And the fact that you can play it in person, over the board, as they call it, or online now, and that online, in fact, there are lots of new added capabilities to help people learn chess and just things you can't do in person. One of the reasons I love playing chess now is when I play online, I can do things like draw arrows on the board. And that can help me with my problems visualizing that I can't do that in real life, right? You can't even really point at things or look at things for too long because it might give away to your opponent what you might do next. Whereas with the advent of it going into a digital space, even though it's this game that can kind of cross the bridge between video game and board game, you get benefits on both sides. So I think there's lots of reasons why somebody might still choose to play a game like that. Um, some people really love tactile feel too. I know I do. I love the pieces and playing in person. There is something that you don't get from a video game, that it isn't quite at that tactile space yet. And maybe why VR or other things like that might be so interesting, or different control modes for different games might be interesting to try and bring that into a digital game.
Yeah, you mentioned the elitism that comes around chess and the idea that if you're not good at it, you must not be smart, and if you are, then the reverse is true. The same could be said about classical music. Other kinds of music are very accessible. That's their definition. They're meant to be accessible, not necessarily to play, but they're certainly more accessible to play than a classical musical piece or instrument. And there is a culture around it, even if it's not deliberate, that when it comes to classical music, Oh, I just can't. I don't understand it. There's too many definitions, especially true classical music 200 years ago, where there's this whole catalog of information and history which enhances the listening. If you understand what was happening to Beethoven when he wrote the Fifth Symphony and understand what different instruments mean and what different instruments related to at the time, it doesn't even have to be programmatic music like the Sixth Symphony. There are barriers to access. There are essentially signals to you to say that if you haven't engaged with this culture, read this book, played an instrument yourself, gone to music school, then forget it. You're only going to understand the surface, and you're going to be judged for only understanding the surface. And I think chess can have a similar thing to it. You also mentioned Starcraft, which I think is really interesting because while chess and StarCraft are often two players, StarCraft has a rock, paper, scissors aspect to it. So in chess, the two opposing sides are almost identical. I say almost because white obviously goes first, which imparts somewhat of an advantage. And because the two queens and kings are directly opposite each other, there is a slight asymmetry, very, very
Mhm.
slight. Whereas StarCraft, unless you're playing, there's three different races, right? Terrans, Zerg, and Protoss.
Mhm.
And they have very different capabilities. There's a complexity to that. And yet there's also the simplicity of, two players playing against each other. But I wonder, StarCraft is known for being a very fast game.
Mhm.
Chess is known for, at least unless, of course, you're playing speed chess in a park in Paris or New York City, is known for sitting back and thinking through your move. Your opponent could easily use that time to look up the move on the internet and have someone, or go into a calculator and have it tell them what they should do.
Mhm.
Is that a concern when you're playing? How do people talk about that in the chess community online?
So online, that is purely cheating. And usually you will be caught and banned from whatever site you were using, because if all your moves match too closely to what the different computers say would be the best moves, you just
Right.
straight get banned. So they've had to deal with that.
Wow.
There is an understanding that if you're playing online, yes, you could cheat. And smart cheaters try to not always, smart cheaters are often good chess players. They're good chess players themselves that will half cheat, right? They will use their own brains at times because they don't want to be caught. But also, what's the fun in that? I have never understood. I mean, that's just cheating. You are no longer playing the game.
So what do you mean? Sorry, what are you suggesting, that these people who are half cheating, they're doing what?
They'll play like they're good chess players, so they will play their moves most of the time, but they will use an engine some of the time. So they will look up certain moves. They'll cheat on certain questions. Imagine you're taking a test. They won't maybe cheat on every question because it's
Right.
obvious, but they will cheat on certain questions. It's just I've never understood the desire for it. I guess that desire, and that's a really interesting conversation to get into in gaming. What is the desire to just beat somebody who is so much like lower like than your capabilities, or you're cheating, so you're just essentially faking being much better than you are. What is the fun in stomping, right? I don't really understand it. And yeah, in the chess world, using an engine, or which is what that would be, like looking up what the best move would be, is considered cheating.
So one of the reasons for this resurgence of chess is the show The Queen's Gambit on Netflix. And I remember there's a scene in there where the main character essentially takes a break mid-game
Mhm.
and talks with her friends about how to proceed. I think it's towards the end. I don't remember exactly. It's been a while since I've seen it, but they essentially huddle up and strategize how to go forward. It's not every move. She doesn't have an earpiece telling her what to do, but essentially she's accessing an engine of other minds of how to go forward. In a way, it's half cheating. Is that at all what you're talking about, or how do we? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember and see. I've only been playing chess really for about a year. I don't know what the rules are. So in that scene, what happens is, and this is a thing in chess, that if you don't finish by a certain time, you essentially break. You take a break and you pause the game exactly where it was. And what you're supposed to do to not cheat is you're actually supposed to write what your next move would have been before you take a break, so that you can't go and think about what your perfect move, and then you open up and the players play like their next move. However, right, there's many moves past that. You can kind of get that brain meld and brainstorming going with your other teammates to figure out, okay, we know that you've chosen to do this. What do you think they're going to do? You know, what are the next steps? I think that is considered cheating. I don't think that's something you're supposed to do. Even in Queen's Gambit, the implication, if I remember correctly, is that they saw that the other player was cheating. They saw that they were being told and brought together, and and that's when they decided to do it. But I could be wrong about that. So I still think it's not like, if it is not a team, because sometimes there are potentially chess like team competitions where it's the team's overall performance that matters. And even though the games are one-on-one, but they can do things like talk to teammates and do that. So I think it was just be straight cheating. That is essentially it. Is, it's supposed to be a game that you are playing based on, and really the game has gotten to this weird point where it's based on memory, because a lot of theory for chess has already been discovered. And if you have a good enough memory, you can remember, you can practice, certain start like openings and lines, to the point that if you have one of those, photographic type memories, you can remember a lot more and do a lot better than the person that doesn't. And at the highest levels, that is what chess has become, which makes it in some ways, and a lot of people have said this, that once the computers came out that could solve chess, that it made chess no longer a fun game. However, most of us can't do that and don't know don't know any of this, and still get a lot of enjoyment out of not knowing what we're doing.
Well, this is what's interesting. Bobby Fischer was known for, and many chess players, Kasparov, are known for memorizing thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of games that they can access while playing and think, well, that's what happened in that championship game. Here's how I can beat my opponent. And it is a feat of memory, which is why a computer was able to essentially best us, because they will eventually be able to access more memory than we can. Whereas a game like Go is more intuitive. The best players don't memorize millions of games. They memorize millions of permutations and strategies and methods and methodologies for defeating the opponent, which is, again, something eventually a computer can learn to do with machine learning over time, but it took a lot longer. We're talking a lot about rules here, which I find really interesting, because, to what extent are we breaking, bending, or just destroying the rules altogether? And to what extent are rules really important for playing any game, whether it's chess, sports, basketball, competitive games where you play by yourself? Like, to what extent do the rules fit in? Because if I remember from the Queen's Gambit, and we'll have to look it up after, it seemed as if it was acceptable during the break to access the minds of others. It seemed that, like, yeah, you could. It's almost like going to the corner in a boxing match, talking to your coach and having him tell you what to do. The coach can't, walk onto the square in the middle of a boxing match and coach you through it. They have to stay outside. But during the break, there's a coming together. But I ask about rules because, for me, a lot of the enjoyment of playing games is in either following the story or following my imagination, and sometimes the rules get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And single player, I have no problem with some games with essentially cheating,
Yeah.
with essentially pressing pause on the rules or making myself invincible to see where things go, to explore parts of the game that I don't care for spending hours and hours and hours, slogging through. Some people follow guidelines and walkthroughs online when they play a game to tell them where all the hidden treasure is. You'd think, where's the pleasure in that? But there's an experience that is on the other side of the barrier of difficulty. So when you play games, how do rules fit in for you?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about the same thing, right? About what does breaking the rules mean for a single player game versus a competitive game. And I do think that, if a lot of players are choosing to break the rules, maybe the rules were bad and we're not leading to enjoyable content. But I think there will always be people, no matter what, that are looking for a different experience than the developer intentioned. And I think especially so single player games, I don't have a problem if somebody chooses to kind of break the rules for themselves, because it's something you're doing for fun, right? There is no stake. Nobody else is getting kind of hurt by it in any way. There's nothing on the line. It's just your own enjoyment. And my personal belief is actually usually that breaking the rules is gonna actually break your enjoyment, because I think a lot of the time a game developer has thought long and hard about the balance of the game, and that oftentimes games aren't fun if you're invincible. Now, there are certain subsets of games where that's definitely less true. So a creative game where you're building and all you want to do, like, yeah, it might be a Minecraft where it's survival and there's bad guys, but if all you're playing Minecraft for is to build really cool structures, then it might make sense for you just to be in a creative god mode where you can fly around and build whatever. At that point it's just digital Lego. And similarly for story games, I am all for difficulties that are easier, or sometimes maybe breaking rules if all you care about is experiencing the story, getting through the game and getting those beats. And we've seen it more and more where developers are adding easier modes to games, or story modes as they're often calling them, for these single player story games, where the point is that we realize you're playing this game maybe to find out the story, and that means that the difficulty isn't really, or the mechanics of the game maybe aren't actually why you're here. And deciding whether that's important as a game developer or a player, you know, is down to the person. And I think video game space has gotten better at providing options for players who are playing a game for different reasons. But usually, well-crafted games have thought this out. And often the game is fun because of a melding of difficulty, of game mechanics, of story, of atmosphere. It really pulls you in where you're not noticing any of those things individually. You're not thinking, man, I would have so much more fun if this one thing were different. You're not really thinking about that because you're just immersed in the game.
Yeah, like there's no wrong door into the game. Like whichever way you come in and whatever it is you're
Mhm.
looking for is appropriate and acceptable and could be interesting for you. I wonder though, Lego is a great example. City Skylines, which is essentially seen as the height of city building games, the eventual evolution of SimCity, where
Mhm.
SimCity essentially failed a few years ago. City Skylines is a great city builder, but is it a game or is it just Lego? And I don't mean to get too much into the semantics, because I think all of this stuff can be put into the same world. But when
Yes.
you're playing a game to follow the story, and you're invincible, when you're building a city with unlimited money and unlimited resources, with all your milestones unlocked, when you are building an empire and seeing how you can organize things without any real competition, is it a game anymore, or is it something different? Is it something closer to reading a story or building a sandcastle or playing with Lego? And again, I don't want to get too much into semantics, but I'm just, what do you think? Is it the same thing?
So I'll tell you one thing that I believe really strongly, and that is what makes a good and engaging game. And I think choice, player choice, and deep choices, not like superficial choices that make somebody think, are a lot of what makes a game good, with a mixture. And this is where you have sliders for these things, with a mixture too of some sort of skill, like in terms of there can be some sort of mechanical skill or something more like that. That's a common way that games are played. But in general, true for board games as well, and true for potentially story games, depending how they're made, and single player and even competitive games, what the player has choice in, and those choices really affecting their gameplay, often creates a good game. And even in a builder, even in, I mean, you kept saying, like, is a City Skylines just Lego, but implying that Lego isn't a game. And see, that's why we come back to what is a game, because I would say Lego is a toy. Are toys not a type of game? Or I guess is a game is a type of toy. Where do you kind of go from there? Even in a building game, you're making choices. You're making choices, you're given building blocks and you get to make the choices of how to put them together. It's not the same kind of choice as maybe you're making in a chess game. And maybe it's not the same kind of choice. Let's say take something that's really about twitch mechanical reflexes, like a fighting game. A fighting game is all about mechanics, but it's also choices. It's how quickly does your brain make the right choice of the right next action to take, and then how quickly can your body actually execute that. But there's still a choice being made. It's not just how good are your mechanics. You have to know things and you have to take a choice in every moment. And those choices just have to be made faster in a game that's really high speed and action.
there's also symbolism too, and narrative, even in games and sports, for example, where that isn't intended. There's a certain sense of representation in a hockey game, what the goalie represents, what the forward represents, what a quarterback in football represents. And when we watch these things, we can't help but tie ourselves a bit to these symbols, even again if you're not intending it. So an example for me would be chess. When I first learned about chess, my dad taught me when I was like 8 or 10 or something like that. And what I found fascinating about it was not the mechanics, certainly not memorizing the number of moves and what things happened in other games, but what the pieces were. Like, what powers does a bishop have? Right? What does this knight on a horse? What does this do? And yeah, okay, I get that it moves in this L shape, whatever, but like, can it, what, how does it affect the bishop? And for me, again, StarCraft, where people play sometimes purely for the mechanics, well, there's also a huge amount of story put into these games.
Yes.
And why is it that the Zerg are this kind of single-minded entity, and all the units represent this idea of the single mind, whereas the Protoss are these almost elevated creatures, and humans are adaptable? Every single design decision, even if it results in mechanics, are based on these representative symbols. And chess is no exception. We could just say for chess that you have type of piece number 1, type of piece number 2, type of piece number 3. Why don't we do that? Well, we don't, because we want something more out of it. And again, it's as you said, that it's this melding. A game is successful when it melds different things together. I have my notebook in front of me. This is the very first page of the notebook. And I was writing something down, Chris Crawford's Dichotomy. So Chris Crawford essentially defined what a game is by having essentially different dichotomies. So the first dichotomy is between art and entertainment, which is interesting because a lot of people would say that today games are art, right? That this is where we can put in so much of our artistic and creative endeavors are into these games. But anyways, basic definition of the game for Chris Crawford: entertainment, not art. And then interactive or not interactive. Well, it's interactive. Right. There's a goal or a challenge. And then under that, there's conflict. If it's no conflict, it's a puzzle. If there's conflict, then either do you attack or do you not attack? If you don't have to attack, it's competition. If you attack in the conflict, it's a game. Again, going back up, if there's no goal or no challenge, it's a toy.
A puzzle is not a game. I am aghast as a person who loves puzzle games.
Right. But also look at the very first dichotomy, art versus entertainment. Think of the wonderful games that have been made for decades now that are clearly forms of art. Yes. I mean, even if you, not just because you have graphics in it, not because you have artists who are working on it, but the whole is greater than the sum of its parts and results in a piece of art that we can engage in creatively, that moves us, that changes us, in the same way that any painting or book or piece of classical music might, or piece of any music might do. And so I recognize that the Chris Crawford's dichotomies maybe aren't helpful, but they are interesting in defining, at least in language, what the differences could be between a toy, a puzzle, a game, a sport, whatever. Yeah.
So on that topic of what was it that they mentioned there? Back to story games, because I know that, we kind of talked through how some of the other things we mentioned could be still games. I think the last thing that we didn't touch on, which is one of your personal passions, is a straight story game. Because if really all the game is telling a story, then how is it a game? And I think the question I would ask too there is, if all you're doing is telling a story, why do it through a game? Right? Like, what is the fact that it is a game adding to the story? Otherwise, why isn't it a movie? Why isn't it a book? Other medium. And obviously, I think usually the answer is, well, interactivity. And that comes back to player choice. So the player is doing something. They are moving the story forward in some way. Maybe they're just experiencing it. And so now I remembered what I was trying to say earlier. So in that choice between conflict or no conflict, I would say that yes, in all games, in anything that is kind of a game, maybe I would argue that there is always conflict. Now that conflict can be with yourself, obviously, even if it's something like your own thought and just a puzzle game where you're just trying to figure something out, and it's that conflict of with self, But even for a story game, the conflict could be with your own curiosity. The conflict is I want to find out. Like I have a conflict with the fact that I don't know this thing, and I'm drawn into this story, and I want to find out more, and I'm not going to stop playing because I need to satisfy that curiosity. There's a bit of you are conflicting with your own desire to find out more. You can't put the game down because you need to find out more. And maybe that's enough, right? Curiosity might be enough. Then you just have to think about, again, if it's a story game, what is the user interacting with it as a game adding to the
Totally.
experience?
We could easily get into a literary discussion here because the idea of conflict has been, talked about since the days of Aristotle,
Mm-hmm.
thousands of years, literally, where we've talked about what is conflict and why is it present when sometimes it looks like it's absent.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it you can have a one person play where they play one character talking to us in the audience for an hour and a half, and there's deep riveting conflict.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that when it comes to a television show, a play, a movie, a game, having some kind of conflict or drama, which is literally what the word drama means, to that there's conflict in there. Is the conflict with oneself? Is it with what other external forces?
Mm-hmm.
And it could be social forces. It could be people. It could be evil creatures. It could be your father. All of these things are different variations of conflict. And I think a game would be no different. It's funny, like I'm not, certainly as a person who plays games, I am not only interested in story. I think we mentioned this before that some games have almost no story to them, but they become vehicles for me to put in my own story.
Yes.
And so I when you put my words back to me and say a story only game, when you're just kind of following a story through a game, that sounds boring to me. And I don't know, I honestly don't know if I'm that interested in playing a game that is just a novel or a movie in the format of a game.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, there would need to be some mechanics, something that I have variability and control over, where my choices don't just matter. It's not, again, like a choose your own adventure novel,
Mm-hmm.
right? Many games could be choose your own adventures. Is that a game, or is that just literature put into the format of a game? And before we slice and dice, I think it's
Yeah.
important to say that that's not enough choice for me. Choose your own adventure books were never enough for me, because I could hold it all in my hands, and I knew that while there was this illusion of defining the path, I knew that there were only 7 possible endings.
Right.
So I could just read them sequentially. I could just figure out what, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's, whereas if you add mechanics to it and say that you're a character with these attributes, and those will change almost infinitely,
Mm-hmm.
then the variations and permutations are therefore infinite.
Mm-hmm.
That seems more interesting to me, and finding a kind of a path between the two, I think would be a good way in. But I can't deny that when a game tells a good story, I'm hooked. Yeah.
Conflict is an interesting one, and I want to equate it to about what people define comedy as. At the end of the day, we find something funny often when it's surprising. And I would say that that maybe could also be intertwined with conflict, in that a stand up comedy show is a conflict with what the audience expects any joke to be about, right? They say that comedy is, they set something up, and you as the listener, you have an idea of what might the payoff be, but often you're surprised and there's some subversion of your expectations. And that could be a conflict, right? A one man play could be a stand-up comedy routine. And there are comedy games as well that also introduce that aspect of the fun part of it is that surprise. And that's something else you can introduce, whether it's through mechanics or through story. You could be surprised in mechanics that you just were not expecting a game to take a particular mechanical turn, or you could be surprised by the story. And all of those things, I think, add to what makes a game fun and engaging and different than just consuming sort of other kind of media. And I've completely forgotten what you actually asked me before I started talking about this. So,
It doesn't matter. But it reminded me of a quote, and I remember I looked this up recently because I thought it was from Italo Calvino, but it might be wrong because I couldn't find the quote. But it was, "Laughter is the brain's reward for making connections." So if you're
Totally.
promising as a comedian or as a game designer
Yes.
to offer what someone expects, they're not going to laugh because there's no new connection to be made. But when you give them something new, something fresh, a connection that they hadn't made before, like maybe an image tied to a word that they hadn't made before, that can be funny, sure, almost purely because we are growing and learning in that moment and we need reward for it. And so we get laughter. It's why we remember as kids, we laughed from our bellies all the time because our elastic brains were constantly making these connections. And I find this really interesting, this conversation about what we're offering to the person playing the game and what we're hopefully getting in exchange, right? And it relates to something that we talked about last time, where I asked you, what are you dying to talk about
Mm.
that we don't have time to talk about? And you mentioned making games that were specific to streaming
Mm-hmm.
and specific to a social aspect of gaming. And this is interesting because we've hit on it a few times here, but especially when it comes to interactive storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
this is such a wonderful avenue for creating games where we can all participate. But there's a difference between things that provide the illusion of choice and the illusion of variability and those that actually do. So a good example, I don't know if you've seen the episode of Black Mirror called Bandersnatch. It's on Netflix, and it's an interactive episode of the Black Mirror series where you choose what happens to the characters. And I remember thinking, oh, this is interesting. And I love that show in the first place. Let's see where things go. And I liked it, but I didn't love it because I always knew in the back of my mind that they only filmed so much.
Right.
It's not that there was actors in a room as I was watching it ready to film anything that my heart desired, right?
Yeah.
So it was an illusion of variability, kind of like a choose your own adventure book where I know that no matter what I do, I've only got the endings that I can hold in my hand, right? And this might be a distinction without difference here, but I'm really fascinated by this, and I wonder to what extent making games for social play fits into this. Making games where we all kind of jump in, is that where a source of true variability could come in, where you put it out for a million different followers to decide on what you're going to do next? That creates a variability that's not only independent from the game or the story, but independent from the prime player too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is interesting. That would be an interesting game, a crowdsourced game. I mean, I think things like that have been tried before to some success. Um, and I think the reason I brought that up last time is that it's something both that is outside of what you had been thinking of, but you had said before that this idea of being limited or constrained in what you were doing might be interesting. And so that's what made me think of it, is it's very constraining in a way, or at least it should help pave a path of, okay, so I know that it's a game that has social aspects, but I know that I want it to be satisfying choices and not the illusion of choice. So that already gets you started thinking about what kind of thing you might want to do if those are your constraints. Your constraints was, it has to be like a streamer friendly game, which means that there are viewers that somehow need to also interact with the game. And what might that look like?
Yeah. It's a fascinating fundamental question of what games are and where they'll go. It's another dichotomy in that list of, uh, like true interactivity in the moment with the game, with other people, other players, other people in the audience, and, you know, to be blunt, single player. Um, Lammy, if there was one thing that you were dying to talk about to finish us off that just didn't come out, or you want to talk about next time, that you want to ask or you want to dig into, what would that thing be?
Maybe it would be good to dig deeper into what makes games fun fundamentally. I know that you've shared on Discord a list of the different ways that people have fun with games. And we obviously talked about it a lot today, but I think there's a lot to dig into there. And I know that maybe it's a very personal choice for everybody, but I do think you can sometimes, as you said, this joy of children making new connections, and laughter is just, the brain's reward for making a new connection. I wonder if there's a way to simplify anyway exactly what it is that makes games fun. And I know that it's come up a lot that, decision making, and even I say that, is what makes games fun. But maybe just discussing it deeper and thinking about what the different aspects of games, the mechanics, the visuals, the story, the audio, how do each of those play a part in what that thing is that at the end of the day makes something fun to stick to play, to share and talk to other people. Yeah, I think we could probably dig into that deeper. I don't know if we'll get to it next time, but
Well, I hope so, because I have a lot to say on that. And I think that this is really fundamental. I'm sorry, that was awful. To the discussion about games and how games are made. I'm reading a book right now called Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, which is a history of games over the last, I think it's over the last 10 years or so, and the difficult trials that were undergone to make some games, the crunch periods, the financial strains, the turning to different funders and wondering that question, always that question, is this fun?
mm-hmm.
Is this feature fun? Is this mechanic fun? Is this storyline fun? Is this NPC fun?
Mm-hmm.
That's almost always, if not always, the question that is asked or should be asked in making a game. And it sounds to me like that would be similar for any other art form. If I think of the TV show Seinfeld, one of the things that carried on from the beginning to the end of that show was Jerry Seinfeld asking for every single moment in that show, is this funny?
Yeah.
Is this leading to something funny, or is this
Right.
funny? And if it's not, cut it. And there are many artists who make music, who write books, who don't have a single question that they ask, but maybe there is always a question. Is this fun? Is this funny? Is this rewarding? Is this is this interesting? Is this interesting to watch?
Right. And I
Can
think
we yeah.
valuable, right? Because fun
Right.
comes back to that entertainment. And it is true that art is not always fun or happy or makes you feel good. And therefore with video games is art. Maybe fun isn't the right word, and I know I use that word, but I meant like valuable and to what you said, which is what does the person playing it get out of it? How are we
Yeah.
giving something to them that they can take away and say, I spent my time well. This was something that, I wanted to come back to for whatever reasons, but it was valuable, not just necessarily fun. Because some games, especially the more artistic you get, I would say there's lots of moments in games that are not fun. And in stories, right? Coming back to conflict. Conflict isn't fun, but it's leading to something that is
Well,
rewarding.
yeah, and if you think of certain comedians, I always go back to George Carlin, who would spend several minutes not funny,
Mm-hmm.
but making a really good point about something that was important, and always bringing it back, always giving you the payoff of a joke.
Yes.
But there were moments in it where he could easily cut it and the joke would still be there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it wouldn't be as funny because he didn't go into the dark space, but I think the same is true with games. And I wonder if, as games have matured and become an art form that is much more muscular and elastic and broad reaching, if we can now ask different questions than is this fun? If we can also ask, is this valuable? Is this rewarding? Is this moving?
Yes.
Is, certainly film and television ask different questions. They don't always ask, is this funny? If you think of the show This Is Us, clearly they're always asking the question, is this making people cry?
Right.
If
If
it
not,
isn't,
cut it.
if not, cut it. If it's not leading to making you cry or
Yeah.
making you cry, doesn't belong in this show. And I wonder if all art can be reduced to these questions, or if simply doing that makes it no longer art. Anyways, we're at the end of our time, Lammy. Thank you so much again for taking the time,
Thank
and
you.
we'll dig into fun next time too.
Sounds good.